Okay, so let's talk about tip of the tongue. I talk about this a little bit in the audio lectures, but let's go into it a little bit more because you've got an assignment that's based on this, and it's really interesting. So I think it deserves a little bit more attention. Let's also move my head out of the way. Better. Okay, so what is tip of the tongue? It's essentially just temporarily forgetting a known word, but you know that you know the word. It could be any word. It could be the word spoon. It could be the name of a person, the name of a movie, the type of car you drive, any of this stuff. Could be any of these. But you're temporarily forgetting it. You can't retrieve it from memory store. That you know it. You just can't get to it. We've all had this, I'm sure, at least once. This happens when I'm teaching in person a ton. So like I'll be like thinking about the next three slides ahead and what I want to say about those, and I'll be talking on the slide that I'm on, and then I'll forget a word. A lot of times it's not an important word. It's like a descriptive word. It's like the word surreptitious. Just forget the word surreptitious, and then I'll say, you know, it's a word, and then we'll just have to come up with a synonym because it's gone. It's gone. Um, and then this also happens a ton when people are asking about movies, bands, actors, something like that. It'll just go away. So when we're in these states, you can still recall a lot of information about the word that you're looking for, right? And we've known this for a long time. So Brown and McNeil did the first research on this in 1966. This is not the first recorded instance of tip of the tongue. That was like way back. I mean, first of all, there's ancient writings about tip of the tongue. The first sort of scientific writing was around the end of the 1800s. But then the actual first like scientific study of tip of the tongue is 1966. So what we tend to know about tip of the tongue words that are qualify as tip of the tongue phenomenon that we a lot of times can recall the first letter. Usually we know the number of syllables, or at least if it's a long or short word, synonyms for the word, similar sounding words, and then also if you speak a language that has gendered articles, right? So like der die das or el la, any of those, you'll still or what el and le, lay, what if whatever it is in French. Um, the speakers of those languages can remember the article that goes with it, the gender of the article that goes with the word, even though they can't remember the word. So all this information still exists, and it's accessible. Not just exists, but it's like it's accessible. You can get to it, but you still can't get to the word. A lot of times I'm wrong about what the first letter is. I don't know why that is. I'll say like I think it starts with an S. It doesn't start with an S, but it has an S in the word somewhere. So like I'm picking up on a sound in the word and assuming that it goes at the beginning. I don't know why that is. I know that most people can get the first letter. This has never been a thing I can do. Syllables, yeah. Synonyms, that's the way I usually try to figure it out. But then I think this is probably different for other people. But in general, this is what people tend to be able to recall about words that qualify as tip of the tongue words. Cannot progress. There we go. Now I need to move my head to the other side. Maybe drop it down. Good. So there's a couple different types of causes that we can talk about. There's direct access and inferential access. These are the main two like ideas that get proposed. They are they're antithetical to one another. I don't think the actual evidence for either of these is antithetical. I think it's the way that it's being interpreted. You'll see what I mean when we go through them. So direct access just means that the speaker actually can access the word. It can access where the word is stored in memory. For some reason, the actual word isn't able to be accessed, but like where it's stored can be accessed. So assume that this is like you have a closet and you're looking for that puffy jacket right there. Right there. This one. But when you go to, and this is a puffy jacket that you can get to a lot, it's there often. When you go to look for it the next day, this is what the closet looks like. Where's my puffy jacket? So you know it's there. You can access the closet where the puffy jacket is stored, but you can't access the actual jacket. It doesn't mean it's gone. I mean, like what it looks like here is like the jacket is just gone. But assume it's there. It's just like invisible for some reason. You can't access it. So you can say like, oh, it's below the two wicker basket things. It's next to the backpack. It's above the purse. And this is all right because there it is. But for some reason, you just can't access the puffy jacket itself. So this is direct access. I can get to the closet. I can open the closet. I see everything near the jacket, but for some reason, I can't see the jacket. Inferential access, on the other hand, means that the speaker is pulling information and trying to remember the word. So they're trying to pull any information that they can. They're attempting to infer the word from information that they can get to. This means that they're not able to access where the word is stored. They're trying to infer the word because they can't get to where it's stored. So this would be akin to you can't get to the closet. You can't get to the closet where this is stored. But you can get to some luggage that you have from a trip. You can look in the luggage and you can say, this shirt usually goes under my puffy jacket. These shoes usually go with my puffy jacket. Don't put your shoes in with your shirts in your luggage. That's gross unless you wrap them in a bag. Anyway, you can get to things. You're trying to access these memories from other places. You can look at another coat rack elsewhere in the house and you can say, oh, this coat's not here, but these are other coats that are like it. And you're trying to figure out where this is stored, but you can't get to the closet. This may not seem like a huge distinction, but it is. I mean, essentially one is like you can get to the place and you just can't see the word for some reason. The other is you can't get to the place at all. And you're trying to figure out where the place is. One is a maze, and one is the jacket is invisible for some reason. Okay, so let's look at, there's some subtypes of both of these also. Oh, that's my picture for inferential access. Don't worry about it. It's a magnifying glass. You know, I should have planned about where my head was going to need to be ahead of time. So some direct access theories, there's three. Blocking, transmission deficit, and incomplete activation. Blocking is the one that seems to happen to me the most, although now that I say that, I wonder if I'm right about that. Okay, so let's go with the example that I have planned for this slideshow. So blocking happens to me with actors a ton. So I tried to get a new one for this lecture. I just pulled up movies and I started just the names of movies and I was trying to figure out who is in them. And like, I don't read a ton about celebrities, so it's not like they don't interest me. I just know about them because movies do interest me. So there is a lot that I don't know. That's what I'm saying. Like a lot of them I'd be like, who's in that? And I'm like, I don't know. It's the guy that's in the other one, but I don't know his name. But some of them you do know because you just can't help but take in from that information sometimes. Okay, so blocking. I'm trying to figure out the Big Lebowski. Obviously, the dude, that was easy to do. But then there's the two friends, right? And so John Goodman is one, and then Steve Buscemi is the other. But Steve Buscemi wasn't coming to my mind. I'm trying to figure out Steve Buscemi. But who kept popping in was Willem Dafoe. Like the name Willem Dafoe kept coming up. This is not right. But there's a lot of similarities here. So like if you've listened to the audio lecture already, you know that I have a similar problem with Johnny Depp and Sean Penn, right? Like they seem similar to me. They're like sort of the same age. They were attractive in the 80s. Now they're old. And one is definitely crazier than that. Well, they're crazy, but also, but in different ways. So like Johnny Depp is one half of a very toxic relationship, right? And like he can't extend his acting beyond Pirates of the Caribbean. So that's a thing. And then the other guy is like, oh, I'm just gonna go interview El Chapo, like the drug kingpin, the cartel leader. And so these are like things that like, okay, these are non-typical actor things. They're probably, I think, similar. Well, I don't know this, but he assumed that they're kind of like similar statures. All these things, they're in kind of similar stonery sort of indie movies back in the day, and like then they became bigger actors. So they kind of fill like a similar role in my brain. Well, so do Steve Buscemi and Willem Dafoe, because they're like probably about the same age. They're white. They look weird. And that's all I need to know. Like this is how they're tagged. Who's the guy that looks weird, who's usually not the main character? Well, it's Steve Buscemi or it's Willem Dafoe. Right? Sometimes they play villains, Con Air and Spider-Man. So they just kind of, I don't know. I know there's a difference. It's not like I have face blindness. Like I can see that there's a difference. But they fill a similar role. And that seems to me that blocking is really what's happening there. So there's a lot of cues, visual, but also the types of characters that they play in movies. So I don't really want to say that's emotional. Contextual, right? So there's like visual cues. There's contextual cues. There's like age-related, which I guess is visual, but all these cues are kind of like I'm opening up the closet and I'm looking for Steve Buscemi. But the problem is when I open up the closet to find him, in the same closet is Willem Dafoe. And so then I get him just kind of like clogging up the area. He's like, ba-ba. I'm something of a tip of the tongue myself. And you can't move it out of the way to figure out the word you're actually looking for. That's blocking. That's the blocking theory, blocking hypothesis. But the thing is, now that we're talking also about what happens when I'm teaching, it is not a blocking situation. Nothing is in place of the word. It's a totally different feeling. The word is just gone. And it's not like I'm saying another word that's coming out. It's just gone. Although one time I was trying to say the word pigeon and penguin kept coming out. I don't know what was going on there. That was a strange, not even sure that's tip of the tongue, because I wasn't like searching for the word. It just kept saying penguin. Probably a stroke. So anyway, some other theories here are transmission deficit, which is basically just the semantic content and the phonological content are not stored in the same place. We kind of know that we don't know that this is true, but this seems likely to be true because of things like Broca's aphasia. People with Broca's aphasia are able, usually, to access semantic information about the words that they're looking for, but not the phonological information to be able to say the word. And I have an example of this. So, sorry, I have to turn on my sound capture. There we go.
The girl is laughing, and cookie jar
Okay, let's go back.
and cookie jar.
So what's going on is this is a person with Broca's aphasia. They're doing the, if you've seen this before, I'll post a picture of this. It's a task where they're looking at a picture and they're supposed to describe what's going on. Describe everything in the picture, describe what's happening. A mom's washing dishes and the kids are trying to steal some cookies. You know, typical kids. So she's describing what's going on. There's a lot of things going on. It's not just that. That's one of the things that are going on. The dishwater is also like overflowing. Is this an outdated picture? Yes, because it was also used whenever this was recorded, which is probably like the 60s. But we still use it. That doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's outdated. Doesn't matter if it's somewhat problematic. It's fine. It's useful because we can look at how people have described it in the past and the problems that they have describing it and the problems that they have describing the same picture now. So she's looking at this picture. She's trying to describe what's going on. Watch when she's trying to say that the kids are stealing cookies from the cookie jar.
The girl is laughing,
Girl is laughing.
and cookie jar.
What about the cookie jar? Watch her hand. They're taking cookies out, right?
Okay. Is laughing, and cookie jar.
Look at that. So she knows exactly semantically what she means. But it's not coming out phonologically. So that's interesting. She can access what the kids are doing. She can access what she's trying to say that they're doing. And yet the words aren't finding their way out. This is similar to transmission deficit. People can retrieve the semantic information in this theory, transmission deficit theory, but not the phonological information. So I can see Steve Buscemi's face. I can see scenes from the movie. I can like kind of hear some of the lines from the movie, and yet cannot figure out the name. So I'm accessing semantic information, but I'm not getting the phonological information. This is likely, I mean, this is more consistent with what happens when I'm teaching in person and I just lose a word entirely. I can get phonological information. I know the synonyms. I know what I'm trying to say, but the actual word has gone. Incomplete activation. Well, this is easy. The target isn't quite active enough to reach conscious experience, but activation ebbs and flows. So you get some related information, and then it kind of like dips down and it comes back up. Now, this incomplete activation kind of explains if this is true. Explains why when you're in a tip of the tongue state, you can feel like you're almost gonna remember it. Like you're feeling around for it, kind of like you're feeling around for something in the dark. You know that you're almost to grabbing it, and then it can slip away. And you feel it slip away too. If you haven't had this feeling, it's difficult to describe aside from what I'm saying. Like you feel like you're approaching the correct word, and then it's like it moves away from you. And then you can get closer to it again, and then it moves away from you. So this is the incomplete activation theory is attempting to explain what's going on there. The activation is ebbing and flowing, like it's getting closer to being activated, it's moving further away from being activated. And that's how we can feel like we almost have it, and then we don't. Which doesn't totally, none of the other hypotheses here accurately account for that feeling, right? Blocking doesn't, transmission deficit doesn't. Another thing that I want to say is this doesn't mean that just because there's 3 different theories doesn't mean that they're all or nothing theories. Doesn't mean that blocking isn't partially true and transmission deficit or incomplete activation is partially true, and they work in tandem. It's possible to have a combination of these factors. So you could have a blocking hypothesis with a little bit of incomplete activation. Maybe the reason why this other thing is blocking is because you don't quite have complete activation, and you feel like you're getting closer, but the thing that's blocking it is preventing you from getting close enough, so it pushes it away. So they're not just off in their own silos and they can't like play together. They could interact. For instance, and let's move on to the inferential access theory. I asked my mom who's in the Mission Impossible movies, and she couldn't come up with the name of the actor. And I said, take me through your process of what's going on. And she said, well, he's a Scientologist. He was married to an Australian person. He does his own stunts, right? Like all these things that are true. And I said, is anyone else like coming in any other name? No other names are coming in. And so all she has is like a bunch of information, but not the name. So this is not, for her, doesn't sound like blocking. For me, it's blocking, seems like, but not for her. So what does this mean? Does this mean that there are multiple types of tip of the tongue effect? It could. And so, like I said, it's also possible that a lot of these are happening not in isolation. Blocking can be happening with a little bit of transmission deficit, a little bit of incomplete activation. And so let's turn to the inferential access theories too, because I think my experience of blocking is not well explained by inferential access theories. However, my mom's experience with not being able to figure out Tom Cruise, wow, that almost worked. Not being able to figure out Tom Cruise's name lends itself more to the inferential access theories. So, one is called accessibility heuristic, where essentially salient memories associated with the target are retrieved, but the word is not. And this could be happening with my mom. So what might be more salient to her than the actual name of the actor is that he's a Scientologist, that he was married to an Australian lady, that he was in a Stanley Kubrick movie, that, all these, that doing your own stunts, stuff like this. So these may be more salient to her than the actual name of the person. Seems likely. Cue familiarity, perhaps less so. There's some familiar overlearned cues that are likely to elicit tip of the tongue, because you're kind of like remembering the memory associated with that cue and not the target. So it's like, oh, I know this memory, but that's not enough to like activate this target over here. Remember, inferential access is saying that we're kind of playing detective, and we're using pieces of information to try to like move towards the information that we're trying to get Direct access theory says we already can get to where the memory is, but for some reason it's not passing through. So my mom's experience is consistent more with inferential access theories. That's not to say it's not consistent with some of the direct access theories. It's just that my blocking experience is only consistent with direct access blocking theory. Hers is more consistent with some direct access and inferential access theories. So it could be that Tom Cruise jumping on the couch on Oprah is super salient for her. Or the pictures of him like clinging onto an airplane while it's in flight are super salient to her. And she's remembering these cues and searching for the information. Or it could be that she's opened the door to the closet where the Tom Cruise information is, and this information is all related, but for some reason she can't see the puffy jacket. It could be in any of these cases. It could be that there's multiple types of tip of the tongue too. So it might not be that there's multiple interacting things going on. That could be happening. But it also could be that there's 2 or 3 different ways to get to tip of the tongue state. And some of them may fall into these different theories and others may not. So let's look at some neural evidence because I do a lot of neuro stuff. Let's see if this can tell us anything. Okay, so one of the big things, neurocorrelates of tip of the tongue, is left insula. Insula, I don't remember how much I've gone on about the insula because I talk about the insula in every class because I love the insula. It's my favorite part of the brain. Is it my favorite? It's my favorite part of the brain, I think. The insula is great. So speech is lateralized to the left hemisphere in most people. This is not totally true all across the board. We've talked about this. 90% of right-handers or above, it's greater than or equal to 90% of right-handers, speech is in the left hemisphere. In 70% of left-handers, it's in the left hemisphere. But some people who are left-handed just have their brains totally flipped. So in the left, in most people, that's where speech is. So left insula is already on the speech side of the brain, mostly. The left insula itself is usually implicated in phonological processing. So, okay, great. We've got a part of the brain, left insula, that's active in phonological processing. And what do we have a problem with tip of the tongue phenomenon is phonological processing. Not semantic, probably. Although if you're looking at inferential access theories, you also have a problem with semantic because you're just like accessing other memories. But if you're looking at direct access theories, you can access the semantic information of the word and not the phonological. So in either case, we're having a problem with the phonological. With direct access, we're not having a problem with the semantic content. With inferential access, we're having a problem with both the phonological and the semantic content. But in both cases, phonological is not coming to us, right? So left insula, phonological processing. No matter which you choose, direct access or inferential access, we know that the left insula is going to be involved in this because phonological information is at play. We know that the left insula does not show a difference between younger and older people when they're correctly naming items. So they're acting exactly the same. How do we do this really quickly? So if in an fMRI study, what you do is you set these up as comparison groups to one another. You look at the bold activation, which stands for blood oxygen level dependent activation. Blood flow goes to areas that are being used more readily. So when people are correctly naming items, who is in, I was going to say Land Before Time. That's an animated movie. That's not going to work. Who is in, no, that's also an animated. This is bad. I should have planned something out. Who plays Iron Man? Okay, so this is like older and younger people get this correct. There's no difference in blood oxygen level dependent signals for younger and older people. They've got it correct. However, in a tip of the tongue state, younger people show a boost of activity in their left insula. So we know that there are some age-related differences. This doesn't really explain what's causing tip of the tongue, because we see a boost of activity in younger people when they are experiencing a tip of the tongue phenomenon. We don't see the boost of activity in the left insula for older people when they're experiencing tip of the tongue. This is showing what's happening when you're in tip of the tongue state already. Not how you got there, but how you deal with it. So younger people have a boost of activation in the left insula. They're trying to grope for phonological information. And older people aren't. They're not doing that. We know that, I don't think I have this on here. Maybe I have it on the next slide. That you just see higher rates of tip of the tongue phenomenon with age. The older you get, the more tip of the tongue situations you find yourself in. It is not correlated with dementia or Alzheimer's, so it's not. If you are a returning student and you notice that you're having a lot of tip of the tongue phenomena, and you just heard me say that it increases with age, don't assume that this means that your brain is old and you're going to have dementia soon. That's not what it means. We don't necessarily know what it means, but we know that it's not correlated with dementia and Alzheimer's. So you're fine. You're fine. Maybe you just have more memories. You've accumulated more memories over more years of being alive, and it's easier to get lost on the path to those memories. Could be. Maybe that's why it's correlated with age. Anyway, the way that younger people deal with this is different. We also know that there's physiological changes that go along with being in a tip of the tongue state. Pupils dilate, which show that you're activating a little bit more. And then let's move over to the right side here. So we know that the anterior cingulate and a whole bunch of prefrontal regions are also active during a tip of the tongue state. This is for everybody. This isn't just for younger people. These areas are associated with working memory, attention allocation, decision making, attention allocation, working memory. Working memory might just be another word for attention. We've talked about that in class as well. And then also decision making. So what does this mean? Well, this is kind of the same thing as left insula. This is what's happening as a response to being in a tip of the tongue state. This isn't telling us how we got to the tip of the tongue state. This is showing what's happening when we're trying to get out of the tip of the tongue state. Put more attention, focus attention, try to figure out, no, that's not right. So you have a decision-making component that's pushing out information that's irrelevant. You're searching for information that is relevant. We see more activation in these regions during tip of the tongue states than in feeling of knowing events. Feeling of knowing is just like if you ask someone, hey, do you know, not what is, but do you know what Pythagorean theorem is? And people are either, even if you can't exactly like write it out immediately, you know that you know it. So all that this task is doing is like, do you know this? People are able to say like, yeah, I know that. It's not saying give it to me right now, because then you might end up being in a tip of the tongue state. It's just asking you if you know this information. A lot of times we know information that we know, and we're really good at also knowing that we don't know information. So like, do you know the formula that's used to figure out the resonant frequencies of a tube closed at 1 int? Well, if you've had my 375 class, you know that, even if you can't write it out at this exact moment. And if you haven't had that class yet, because this is not a you can get into this without a prerequisite, so you probably take that later. You're like, I don't even know what you just said. No, I do not know that. So That's the difference. So we see more activation in anterior cingulate prefrontal regions in a tip of the tongue state than in a feeling of knowing event. So we know that it's not just feeling of knowing. That's the point of this. Tip of the tongue is not feeling of knowing. It's associated with feeling of knowing because we know that we know the word. But then tip of the tongue, we're also searching for the information. So the last question that I have here is like, is this indicative of what causes tip of the tongue, or is this regions engaged when trying to resolve tip of the tongue? These are all regions engaged when trying to resolve tip of the tongue. We actually don't know what happens when tip of the tongue states occur. And likely tip of the tongue happens so quickly that we couldn't detect it with fMRI anyway. We need to employ something like EEG. Those studies have been done, but they're also kind of inconclusive. And one of the things you know from the lectures in the beginning of the class is, well, fMRI is very good at being local areas, and EEG is really good at being time synced. So we kind of have this problem of, do you want to be sure of where something is happening or when something is happening? You can't have both. And so to figure out what's going on with tip of the tongue, we kind of need to know exactly when and where. If there's something going on like in a specific part of the brain. But again, it could be like a multiply determined thing that's happening. It could be like signals from multiple different, we haven't talked about this in the class yet, but multiple different nodes, subnodes that are all working in tandem with one another. Any one of those could return like an error in processing, and that could create a tip of the tongue state. So even if we get to the point in neuroimaging where we can find time-linked stimuli and also be really good at pinpointing where they are, it may not tell us a ton about tip of the tongue because there might be several different areas, each of which could begin a tip of the tongue state. Okay, so everything that we've talked about so far is kind of the standard research that you'll find in a lot of places for tip of the tongue states. What's going on right now? The top bullet point is a bullet point that was left over when I made this slideshow. So don't worry about that top bullet point. It's nothing. Just go to the next one down. Can't believe I forgot to delete that. So when looking at faces, this research, the actual bullet point, presented clear images and blurry images. And interestingly, and then the task was like, name this celebrity with a clear image and a blurry image. The clear images produced more tip of the tongue states than blurry images did. So that's interesting, right? Because a blurry image was either like you knew the person well enough to reconstruct the blurry image and say, oh, that's... This is so embarrassing. I could not think of any, like, celebrities. Whatever. We're just going to say the person from whatever. So they show you a picture. You know the celebrity good enough to say, like, that's the guy from Get Out and Nope. Right? And even though it's blurry, you're like, I've watched these movies a ton of times. Nope, by the way. Excellent movie. I want to go into this whole thing that I just realized about the title. I'm going to try not to give this away if you haven't seen it, but the title kind of gives away who lives at the end of the movie for Nope. That's all I'm going to say. I'm not sure if this is a thing that's like, I don't know if anybody's written about this on Reddit. I'll figure it out. Maybe I'll write a post on Reddit about how the title is prophetic. Anyway, great movie. So you see a blurry image. You know the person well enough to say, oh, I know who that is. It's this person. Or you don't know who it is. So you just say, I don't know. But a clear image produces tip of the tongue states, more likely. So either you know who it is, you say this is this person, or you say I don't know who that is, Or you say, oh, 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 yeah, I know who that is. Hang on a second. Their name isn't coming to me. So what does this mean? This means that a blurry image doesn't have a lot of cues. A clear image does have a lot of visual cues. So it could be that this may be showing a little bit of evidence for the inferential access theory. With a lot more visual cues, you have a lot more information that's pointing to the target word. And so you're trying to get there. You're inferring the information from these other cues. Because if you know who it is, if you have direct access, you shouldn't necessarily need those visual cues to get there. So that could be showing evidence for the inferential access. Another interesting thing is that we know that Parkinson's disease is characterized by higher rates of tip of the tongue states. Now, again, age is correlated with tip of the tongue states, but it's not correlated with Alzheimer's and dementia. Age is correlated with Parkinson's disease. Tends to be older people that have Parkinson's disease, but even beyond just the age correlation, Parkinson's disease has an even higher correlation. And the more your Parkinson's disease progresses, the more tip of the tongue states you experience. This is something that has not really been researched. This paper you can see, well, all these are from the last 2 years. Now, there's one down here that's from a little bit longer ago. You'll see why I brought that one in. So this is all within the last, at the time of recording, although I'm probably going to be using this video for probably at least a year or two. It's pretty recent, right? So let's just say within the last 5 years, this research has been done. And so this is not the first time that the correlation between Parkinson's disease and tip of the tongue states have been recognized. The first paper, I think, was in the 2010s, but no work has really been done with it. And in fact, this one from 2024 isn't really work digging into it beyond just saying, like, yeah, people with Parkinson's disease have higher rates of tip of the tongue states. That's really all it's saying. So I did a little bit more work in this. If you've had 310 with me, you know that I'm really interested in the dopaminergic pathway, including the substantia nigra, which creates a lot of the dopamine in the brain. And we know that dopaminergic drugs enhance memory recognition. So you can give someone, specifically, also, I'm going to say drugs that like directly target the substantia nigra. So like they ramp up production of dopamine in the substantia nigra. So you have more dopamine being produced in the dopaminergic system, especially the substantia nigra. We see people get better at memory recognition. So they look at a bunch of items, a bunch of houses and faces and stuff, and then they do a task that's like, have you seen this before? People that are taking the dopaminergic drugs do statistically significantly better than the people who are not taking the dopaminergic drugs. Well, what is the link? Well, Parkinson's disease is a problem with dopamine function. The substantia nigra doesn't produce enough dopamine in Parkinson's disease. This means that there's not enough dopamine in the system, and then we see higher rates of tip of the tongue. So we see a link between memory recognition problems, between problems of pulling objects from memory, items from memory, words from memory, and dopamine. So it's not really all that crazy that Parkinson's disease is correlated with tip of the tongue if dopamine affects memory recognition. It's all part of the same system. What does this mean? Does this mean that we should maybe be looking at tip of the tongue states as early identifiers of dopamine issues? Maybe. I don't know. But it's something that could be researched. Lastly, we know that cardiovascular health is related to tip of the tongue states in older adults. So age is related to tip of the tongue. There's more as you're older. But on top of that, bad cardiovascular health leads to a lot more tip of the tongue states. That doesn't mean that the age correlation is because of poorer cardiovascular health as you age. That's not true. It's independent of that. It's just like as you age, you tend to get more of these. But there is also another correlation with cardiovascular health. So the worse cardiovascular health you have, the more tip of the tongue states you have. Okay, so let's talk about this for a second. Now we're going to get into we're moving away from research. We're moving away from like things that are proven. We're going to go into like why is this class important? Well, this class is important for a whole bunch of reasons, but this particular lecture is important because what if there are interesting things like tip of the tongue that don't seem necessarily useful? A lot of the stuff maybe that we talk about here aren't super useful. Maybe. Sine wave speech, streaming effect, which you'll learn about later, tip of the tongue. These are kind of like cool, fun illusions, right? Unless you start making connections between Parkinson's disease is correlated with higher rates of tip of the tongue, poorer cardiovascular health is related to tip of the tongue states. Can you use some sort of method of either generating tip of the tongue states and how many are generated in a given task, or self-report of tip of the tongue states? Can this be used as early identification of Parkinson's or cardiovascular issues? Now, all of a sudden, tip of the tongue moves from something that's just kind of like an interesting parlor trick, something that's cool to talk about in a psycholinguistics class, but doesn't really have an impact on anybody aside from like, isn't it weird how the brain works with language and like maybe semantic information and phonological information like aren't always in the same place? Yeah, that's interesting. But now we might be able to use this to actually like help with health outcomes. Possibly. We'll see. I'm planning on using some of this in my own research. I'm sure that there's tons of other researchers around the country who are going to do the same thing. And I shouldn't say that, around the world who are going to do the same thing. And we'll just have to see if this turns into anything. But it would be interesting. And people in this class could end up being the researchers who do that. Right? Because not everyone is going to end up going into SLP or AUD. Some of you might go on to PhD. Some of you might change your mind in the middle of your pathway. You might get your master's in SLP and decide, well, actually, research is something I want to do. Or you could look into this while you're working in wherever you end up. But now you know the information. And we can use this, we think about these things kind of creatively to solve problems, to make health outcomes better for everybody. And that's tip of the tongue. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to try to induce a tip of the tongue state in yourself using that sheet that has like kind of dated tip of the tongue inducing situations. There's an extra credit assignment that you can do to try to come up with more modern tip of the tongue inducing cues. And if I get enough of those, what I want to do is put those together into like a new tip of the tongue inducing battery, publish it for people to do more work with tip of the tongue states. And if that does happen, of course, you will get credit in the paper, possibly not by name, because there's so many people that have contributed to this, but maybe by name, if I only take like 5 of the things. So we'll see. It'd be good because you'll see when you do these, you have to be a certain age to know a lot of these questions. And I mean like maybe retirement age, possibly. Or maybe I'm just bad at knowing pop culture. Maybe these are things that people know and I'm just like not, like it could be. But I don't think so. Okay, go off and do your assignment. Thank you. See you in the next video.